I'd like to introduce the panel. I'll introduce Dave Temkin from Netflix, who's moderating, and I'll let him introduce the rest of the session.
Pour some water here while we talk. Hi, I'm Dave Temkin, and I'm VP of Network Infrastructure at Netflix. I just did this panel about 36 hours ago or so at NANOG in Austin, Texas. And when we were coming up with the idea around this panel, we thought, hey, this is much broader than just network operations. And so we decided to bring it here as well. What I want to do first is introduce our panelists. And so what I'm going to do is start from the end. And Suzie, could you tell us who you are?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Hi, my name is Suzie Gleeson. I'm VP of Global Accounts at Digital Realty Trust, based in San Francisco. And I've been in this industry for many, many years. I work on our global account sales team, but my side passion is really trying to focus on getting more women into this industry, and as such, I'm a co-founder of Women's Tech Forum, which is our industry women's group, and also the Women's Leadership Forum, which is a group that I've set up and co-founded within Digital Realty.
Hey, I'm McRae. I work at BT. I look after architecture and strategy.
Hi, my name's Louisa Gregory. I'm Chief of Staff at COLT Technology Services, and I do a number of different things, one of which is working for our CEO and supporting a lot of our projects across the business and the wider industry. And I also lead on our inclusion and diversity strategy for all of COLT's 5,000 employees globally.
There we go. All right. So Suzie, we're going to talk about a few things here. That we're going to throw around a bunch of terms. We're going to talk about inclusion and diversity, and we're going to define that in a moment. We're also going to talk about sponsorship versus mentorship. Mm-hmm. And one thing that I was thinking about the other day was the person who got me to where I am, mm-hmm. who enabled me to have the career that I do. I can definitively point back at that person. Do you have that person in your life?
I do, and I actually met with her yesterday. I started out my career buying and selling switch minutes here in London for AT&T International back in the 90s. And AT&T was a great training ground, certainly when you're starting out your career, because it was such a big organization, but we had a small office here in San Francisco, but it meant that you could move departments and try different things. And the woman that I worked for, Sarah Barkley Hudson, she ran the global call center for the AT&T calling card. And with that, that really started to bring in true international exposure, worked with the marketing teams across Europe, Middle East, and Africa. I got to travel a ton. And so when you're early in your career, 20-something years old, it was a really exciting time. But for what really propelled me forward was I was fortunate enough to win a green card for US green card in a lottery. And for that, I needed to go over to the US because I worked at AT&T at the time. She was able to arrange for me to go over and have a work assignment over there so that I could fulfill my obligations. And really with that, then that started to open up so many more doors for me. And really then I had to make the hard decision to leave AT&T and move on to level 3 communications, but she has been there every step of the way to encourage me along.
That's awesome. Neil?
Maybe a life situation rather than a mentor. So if you've seen the movie Trainspotting, I grew up in that neighborhood. And it was quite probably not the most exciting while basically living in the heroin drugs capital of Europe, where there was not a lot of ambition, let's say. And I kind of personally felt there's got to be more to life than that. So it sent me off on a path, and actually my grandfather put 10 pence in a Space Invaders machine when I was about 5. And that got me onto, okay, how does this thing work? So he's probably the person that stepped me into technology specifically, but wanting to really have a life where there was much more value in it than what my surroundings were was a big motivator for me. And then I was very fortunate to be named after Neil Armstrong, so that's always been a bit of a wind in my sail in terms of engineering knowledge and wanting to learn how things work. So those are probably the things that I would learn. But to some extent, to learn about technology was a personal thing. There wasn't classes on at school about it. You had to pick up books. You had to pick. It was all about a lot of self-investment. And to some extent, the internet wasn't as available as it is today. It was there, but wasn't. But as it's 50 years old today, the internet. I don't know if you knew that, but it's happy birthday, internet. So. So a lot of self-investment, but then, meeting up with a lot of like-minded folk. First ISP here in the UK, Demon Internet, which I helped found, where we're all trying to, get people connected. So a lot of sponsors, but also a lot of kind of self-investment of time and reading and trying to try things and breaking things. And actually, in the internet of the late 80s and 90s, it was okay to break it. People got upset that an email took a bit longer, but it wasn't the end of the world. That if you have a problem today, it's quite hard. So creating the kind of safe environments for people to learn, I think is crucial in how we invest in the knowledge of future network engineers.
That was actually a topic. That's how we closed the panel at Nanon, which was Najim Ahmed. Those who know him is my peer at Facebook, leads the network organization, and he was talking about their evolution from the Facebook moniker of move fast and break things to like, no, we can't break this stuff anymore. And Levi Perigo, who was a professor at UC Boulder, offered that if anyone wanted to come and join his master's program, they're welcome to come and break things all day. So that became the evolution of where we're allowed to break things, which is, I guess, in education now.
I think that that speaks to a really interesting point when it comes to leadership as well, because we've moved from an era where we can churn and burn our people and we don't really care, but we all are very much aware of the war for talent now, and I think that speaks to, I guess, the topic that we're here to talk about, being what are the future skills of leaders that we need. But to answer your question, for me, there was probably more than one key individual in my journey. And growing up in a small regional town in country Victoria in Australia is certainly an experience in itself. And I've lived internationally for the last 10 years in Singapore and now in London, and all of those things form who you are as a person. And the people that you meet along the way. But I've been very fortunate to have probably key individuals that have given me, in some respects, a bit of tough love, and forced me to take some of those steps. But one of the key things for me that I've learnt along the way is never say no to an opportunity. If you think you can't do it, well, just find people who can help you do it, but don't say no. And that's what leads to growth and the ongoing opportunities that we all get. And I guess a little bit like Neil said, that lifelong learning sort of feeds into that as well. You need to be curious about the world around you and the opportunities that exist.
Absolutely. To answer my own question, I barely graduated high school, if I'm being honest. I hated high school. And I did a summer internship at Bristol Myers Squibb, the pharmaceutical company, that I had gotten through a mutual friend who, back in the bulletin board days, the BBS days, had met there, who was a couple years older than me. He had introduced me to his manager, and his manager agreed to bring me in for an internship. I originally started in help desk, and for those of you who know me in the room, you will know that probably didn't go very well. And they noticed that I also had an interest in how all this stuff connected together, and so this gentleman, Chris Baldwin, said, hey, why don't you go shadow the network team? And so that's kind of where it started, and Chris he kept me around through the rest of my high school time, brought me in as a co-op, gave me a full-time job after high school. If it hadn't been for Chris, I wouldn't be here. To your point, I look at an opportunity, I look at, when someone says, hey, can you do this? And something I tell my team fairly regularly too is you should jump on that, right? Someone is trusting you with that opportunity, and you never know. If you want to just stay doing what you're doing today, that could disappear out from under you at any point in time. So, as much as it is opportunity, it's also self-preservation. So, Suzie, the term that we talked about was the idea of sponsorship versus mentorship. And can you take me through that a little bit?
Yeah, so really how the separation between that is mentorship is very much seen as somebody who can empathize with you, might work in a similar role, and is really there to focus on guiding you through your career. A sponsor, on the other hand, generally tends to be somebody who's got power and influence, and the relationship between mentor and mentee differs with sponsor insofar as a sponsor would consider that person then their protege, and really they're there to help guide you through your career. So I think that's important, and it's an important differentiator. A lot of companies have mentorship programs. We're just about to start one at Digital Realty. But I have seen more widely across the industry, more and more senior leaders, whether it's a Jim Smith who's over at Equidex and others, they've got named people that they're sponsoring. And I think that's important, especially with folks here in the room, for those of you who are in that position of power and influence, to really try and look at some young talent, some strong talent, and really take them under your wing and give them those opportunities.
Louisa, do you find opportunities for that at COLT, or where have you seen that in your career?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we operate in predominantly Europe, but we've got a very big business in Europe. We've got, in Asia. We've got presence in the US. And one of the things that we're really focusing on is our internal mobility. So uncovering the talent and giving them opportunities to move throughout the organisation, whether that be on secondment. And actually we've got someone here who's our CMO, just announced, who started in our Tokyo business. He has worked in our Singapore business, our London business, and has progressed through. So he's a great example of people that we tap into and help move through the organisation. And if we talk about inclusion and diversity, we could do better when it comes to women. We only have about 27% of women within our organisation. So we are focused on bringing more women up into leadership positions, and there's a few things that we can tap into there that are important to move that dialogue on.
When we talk about inclusion and diversity, it's quite common that we lump the two together, right? We say I and D or D and I, and we usually say the two in the same breath. And they're very close relatives, but they're not the same thing. Netflix has a VP of inclusion. The way that she likes to say it is diversity is getting asked to the dance, and is being asked to the party, and inclusion is being asked to dance. Did I say that right? I'm tripping over myself with the 7 hours of jet lag / 3 coffees to get over it. So we talk about the two in the same breath quite commonly, but they are two very different things, but they're important together. And one thing that we're passionate about on the stage is bringing women into the industry, but also there's just a general breadth of diversity, whether it's ethnic diversity, it's diversity of background, sexual orientation, things like that, where it is not a clear path to figuring out kind of how do we get these people into the industry to begin with. And so, one thing that I want to talk about here a bit is how do we start earlier, right? We're talking about a lot here, how do we do this today in our companies, but not only how can our companies do better, how can we do better as people? Neil, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Sure. I mean, so, at BT, we've been looking at how we improve the diversity of our organisation, and of course, you set targets, you set objectives, but actually, you start to look at some of them. You think, actually, how are you going to achieve that? And what we found, we did a lot of research in this space, and what we found is, frankly, there are just not enough people entering into our industry as a whole, let alone as a diverse base. And we worked actually with the government, the Department of Education. We worked with many schools and universities, and what we really found is unless that you place technology and telecommunications knowledge at quite a young age, actually primary school. By the time, if you haven't done it then, by the time they graduate or are looking for a career, you've probably missed the boat. So we started a number of programs, and we've just announced an expansion of it as well, where we started to train teachers so that they could talk more about how does the iPhone work, how does that Wi-Fi work, you know, all the how does networking work, and try to make it an inspiring technology, and also how networks have changed the world over time. And you know, everything we do today touches the network. 20 years ago, that wasn't the case. So through primary schools, and then into secondary education, but also we've discovered, probably in the last 18 months, that as children go to become young adults and go to university, quite often the parents have quite a strong influence on where they go, either in the university choices, or not going to university, or you know, becoming an apprentice or a graduate, and so we started to work a lot more with parent groups to ensure that actually you can have a really valuable and enriching career in technology, because quite often, you know, they get pushed towards, well, why don't you do something in business or in finance or in, you know, the obvious places where you know it's probably, you know, a career's there, probably a boring one, but compared to what we do, but you know, so engaging with those parent communities, and that's one of the great advantages of working at BT. We are literally in the community everywhere, you know, and that's a really important capability that we've probably underutilized in engaging with the community. So we've got a big program around expanding the number of teachers that we train, expanding that to our targets to give 10 million kids tech skills in primary schools and into secondary schools. And then that, in my mind, that helps at least have a pool of people that's bigger. We'll have, you know, both all kind of levels of diversity in it, and really to show that technology isn't a geeky thing. It's something that actually everyone touches, everyone's engaged in. And then you know, be kind of engage that inclusion part, that actually a career in technology isn't a weird thing, it's a normal thing. You know, when I talk about what I do to anyone that's not in technology, it's like, I just say I kind of fix phones. It's just easier to say that, right? Yeah. So really trying to get to a place where, as well as being an accountant, being a network engineer or a technologist is seen as, you know, a really fulfilling career, both internally in our industry, but also externally. And actually, my challenge to everybody in the room is, you know, when was the last time you really talked to people and been proud about what you do? You know, I don't think we do enough of that in our industry, and the massive changes that we've made to the world. We kind of hide a little bit, and I really push everybody to say, you know, why aren't you talking about the fact that the things that we do really change the world? You know, Dave, your organisation's changed TV massively, and film. Suzie, your organisation's just changed technology from every aspect of it. It's enabled what Dave does. And I just don't think we have those sort of conversations to inspire people into our industry, and being inspiring, in my mind, is probably half the battle to attract new people in, but also the people who are sponsoring them as they grow older, and from, you know, primary schools through secondary, their sponsors or parents, we've got to get them on board as well.
Yes. Suzie, it looks like you.
So our company, we're a much smaller company at Digital. So where we've started, we're kind of working backwards a little bit. So we've been teaming up with some community colleges, in particular in Northern Virginia, and bringing some of the students in through our data centers. A lot of people don't know what a data center is, and the importance of it. And actually, as a result of that, just as recently as last week, one of the young girls who was about to graduate has just signed on for an entry-level position, so we're super excited about that. That's a new program for us. And another program that we've just recently launched is our veterans program, so teaming up with the military. We've just, year to date, we've recruited 49 veterans, 3 of which are women. So while we'd love to have a better balance on that, it's certainly a start. That's a key focus for us.
Yeah, if I could maybe slightly take it in a different aspect. One of my beliefs is that as we walk through life, we make our mark on everybody that we encounter, whether we realise the mark that we make or not. So we better always make sure that it's a positive one and not a negative one. And at COLT, we do all of those things that Neil and Suzie have talked about in terms of early education and engaging with our communities and, you know, identifying graduates and bringing more women in through our graduate program. We do all of those things. But one of the other things that we do, which is more fundamental, is finding ways to give children an opportunity that they may not have even had to begin with. And the COLT bike ride is one of the things that we do every year. We've raised, this year we will get close to €1.5 million that we've donated to children's charities over the last 8 years through fundraising. And that's all goes to children's charities. We don't know the impact that makes, but what we hope is that it creates pathways for people. You know, there's orphanages in Japan that we support. There's terminally ill children in Spain that we support through those charities. So hopefully opening up worlds that those kids never would have had advantage of to then go and take, you know, the STEM education or the graduate programs at Digital Realty or others. And I think that's sort of getting back to that grassroots level is also another way to impact what we do.
In the NANOG panel earlier this week, the professor had actually pointed out that greater than 50% of his current class are women. And that was an amazing statistic that like took the air out of the room for a moment because no one expected him to say that. And what I wonder is, you know, we talk about a lot, there's the term pipeline problem. And people find that term problematic, the pipeline problem. And we can go through inception with that as many times as we want. But when you hear the term pipeline problem, what do you think?
So there's a study that's just been released, and it's co-authored by McKinsey and leanin.org. And it's produced every few years, but the latest statistics are that generally speaking, there's almost equal number of men and women joining the workforce together. And while there's been huge strides at the C-suite level in terms of getting more women in senior positions, what they've identified really is getting women to the first rung of the management ladder is probably the biggest challenge that we have, because you go from a 48% male-female ratio, that drops down to 38% at the first management level, and then it continues to fall. I think today, on average, 30% of vice presidents are women, 70% are men. So it's all about trying to get back and focusing in on how do we get women in equal measure to the first management rung of the ladder. And that's a combination of training, and in particular, unconscious bias training. And there's stats out there that says companies who have a smaller gap in their diversity portfolio, over 50% of their employees have gone through unconscious bias training. And really, when you think about unconscious bias, you know, that's really to get through people have set things in their mind. You know, they want to work with people who look like them, who, you know, have the same personalities and that. And so it's really identifying and recognizing that takes place, and really to try and really open your mind when you're in that position, certainly in recruiting. Also the sponsorship that we talked about earlier, that's really important as well, to get people up to that first rung of the ladder.
What do you think?
I agree. I agree with Suzie. I think, you know, we talk about leaders too, and the fundamental role that leaders play in this whole process. Yesterday morning, I was at a fabulous roundtable led by Ruth Redding at the Women in Telco and Tech breakfast here at Capacity, sponsored by Verizon, where we talked about imposter syndrome, which I challenge people in the room to actually Google what imposter syndrome means, because it's pretty depressing when you read the actual definition. But our key takeaway at the end of that was, it's not about saying to people who suffer from imposter syndrome, just be braver. It's about creating environments where they can flourish, and that's down to the leaders that we have in the organisation. So, I think that what I see is we're moving away from some of the technical skills that we need our leaders to have. They need that in addition to some more soft skills and leadership capability. Inclusive leadership and all the unconscious bias training as well is just becoming more critical to help people flourish.
And sorry, Dave, just to add on to that, that's really one of the drivers behind setting up the Women's Tech Forum that we have here in our industry. Because coming to these conferences, we all go to PTC, ITW capacity. We realize that there is a community of women out there, and we're largely outnumbered, but to be able to provide that safe environment where you can network and you can get to know people and people who are in the same position as you. So, giving people the confidence really to have a voice and have a support group around them. I think that's hugely important.
Neil, I don't know if you had anything on that.
Yeah, I think I became a manager because the guy who managed me was rubbish. I thought I could do a better job than him, I'm sure, actually. I probably was 100% wrong. Being a leader and a manager is super difficult. Actually, I was so concerned, back to your imposter syndrome, I was so concerned that I just couldn't do this. I did an MBA for part-time because I reflected that, crikey, I've got loads of qualifications in technology and programming, nothing in management. My only experience is how bad the guy managed me was my training. So I went, I did a lot of, again, self-learning and training, which was supported by my organisations, both COLT and C&W at the time. But even still, with all that training, people are, they do what they want to do, they behave how they want to behave, and you've got to find that what I've learned is your goal is to create the right environment for them to flourish. That is the key goal, and occasionally ask the right questions so that your people are heading in the right path. But it's all, I go back to this part about inspiring folks as well, showing the value of what we do. I think super important, and I think we need to be slightly cautious where, and I speak from my own personal perspective here, but having a leader that you have some respect and some admiration for is also important. And I think in technology spaces, we probably undervalue that aspect of it. I used to be able to write 68,000 assembly language. I probably couldn't do it today. I've probably forgotten all about it. But being able to talk about the challenges in programming and building stuff and understanding that when you're running a team of coders or a team of technologists, having a way to relate to them, I think, is really important. And I've seen quite a few organisations that can have this general manager type direction, which I think is just so wrong, because in my experience, you're not able to feed your team the things that they need, about creating that right environment, because you don't understand the environment, about the things that you need to learn because you haven't learned them. So I think having, a really, an understanding and experience in that space, I think is also very important. At least that's my perspective, and I think something that we, and your point about more people coming in, the more people we've got experience with, the better that is. And unconscious bias is really, really important thing to be aware of. It's so easy to think, oh well, this person here, I know him, he's great, I'll just put him into this job, because actually, a lot of people that you're hiring is to make your life easier to that extent. But actually, what you find is the people you think are superstars, actually, if you continually measure them, quite often you get surprised about who really are the people who drive value in your organization. And it's very often not the people you think it is. So having a really you know, strong way of understanding who is making what contributions, how do they make them, is also quite important, so that when those roles come up, you've got, you think you know what you need, you've got a wide selection of people who could potentially do it, and a diverse selection of people, so that you can really, you know, enable them. But then in some cases, that's where sponsorship comes in, because one of my team members, Josie Smith, she runs IT architecture for BT. That's a £1 billion budget. And when I hired her, there was a few questions. You know, is Josie going to be capable of this? I was like, absolutely, because she hasn't been in the limelight, and being in the limelight, for many people, women and men actually, isn't often, you know, where they sit naturally. So you've got to figure that out and find the inverted commas limelight for those people. It might not be on stage like this, it might not be presenting to the board, but there are things that they do that are outstanding, and you've got to discover them. And I think that's one of the key things about being a leader, is discovering the talent in your people, because it's there. Rarely do you get bad employees. You know, sometimes you get a few troublemakers. I'm probably one of them, but you know, everybody has a talent that if you can expose it and nourish it, you know, people can do amazing things. Even people that you probably might think, how did they do that? And I'm sure people thought that about me when I was pissing them off doing crazy things when I was an engineer.
So one of the themes that I'm hearing is related to how do we cultivate and how do we continue to grow leaders, both, you know, from the start. And, you know, the topic of this panel is the next network professional. And so I used the word professional on purpose because I didn't want to imply specifically leadership versus hands-on technologist versus someone in the middle. And one interesting tension, I doubt, to the points earlier, I doubt that anyone who has managed to make it all the way to college in STEM says, well, I want to go be a mid-level manager at a telco. Like, I doubt that that is what they set out to do, no. And that is part of their career path, but not necessarily what their goal is. That said, we need lots of mid-level managers at telcos or content companies. It's not like it's a meaningless job. So how do we create those opportunities, and how do we guide people one way or the other earlier in their careers to put them on the track that they probably are going to flourish in? I ask that because it's a loaded question to some extent, saying that you tend to see, as people grow into that model, people tend to sometimes end up in the wrong track because they either want the title or they want the money, or to Neil's point earlier, they just want to be in charge of tech. They want to call the shots, but maybe they don't necessarily want to lead people. So how do you see the tension there?
I think that's a really important question, Dave. And so, and actually, it was one of the things I studied, and I visited a number of companies when I was doing my MBA. It was how do you create a career path for people that becoming a leader isn't the only choice. And what we found in that is it's actually really possible to do it. You have to put the trust in those people to actually run a platform like that. And also, the golden rule is you can never fiddle with it. So we have at BT we have a set of certifications where you go from kind of you know, principal to leader to expert to distinguished engineer. And it's, of all the things that we've done to motivate our team, that is probably the biggest one. And we have something like, I don't know, 20,000 engineers in BT, of various disciplines, from software to network to optics to you know, IT as well. So you create that, you make it really clear about what the steps are, you align everything to it, job descriptions, salary, bonuses, share up, everything is related to that. And, you know, I actually sit on one of the boards where people come in and are certified, and it's phenomenal to see people come in that I you know, in a large company, I don't know who this person is, but you see what they've done, and you try to create, I've done this little thing, but actually that little thing you've done is massive, and they don't actually understand it themselves. And then a collection of things, and also giving back to the industry, being part of forums like this. And it's been hugely valuable to us. We've got almost as many women engineers at the principal level as we have male engineers, which I would never have guessed. As we go into universities, we talk about it. In fact, we just had our recent graduate intake, and we created a Facebook page for them all to join. And we started talking about this part of it, really engaging before they're even in the company about how they should be thinking about things. But then there's the golden rule though, and it's kind of it's not maybe a message to HR professionals, but to other managers and other leaders as a whole. You can't mess with it. You can't suddenly say this bad manager that it's not really called out to be a manager. You can't suddenly make him, or we'll make him a distinguished engineer and chuck him in the technical career path, because that just destroys all the credibility of it. And we saw that at a number of companies where they had done that. So we have this whole tech pathways thing. It gives people a direction. We also have a special component of it, very specific for women, where we've got a tech women that my colleague Rachel runs. That's also part of this accreditation process to create the right environment for women to be successful in that accreditation process. And we're trying to open it up to other areas where we think that we might have some gaps in our diversity area, although that can be quite challenging, because you don't know what you don't know. But ultimately, if you aren't providing a way for people to grow as a technologist, and you're a technology company, you're probably kidding yourselves on. All those people are going to leave and go to Google or go to Netflix or go somewhere else, or COLT. But then at the same time, you need to invest in leaders so that people get the time to develop their career and have the right leaders who create that environment. So again, we have, and actually this is true of probably every company I've worked for. We're always focused on leadership, and sometimes I say to myself, Craigie, not another leadership thing, but actually leadership it's like being fit. If you don't run every day, you won't be fit. If you don't practice leadership and thinking and new things that come along in leadership, you won't be a fit leader, and you won't be the best leader you can be. So making sure that you make time to practice and learn and train your leadership part of your brain is probably one of the most important things that you can do. Otherwise, you just won't be successful. Louisa?
Yeah, the original question was around attractiveness of individual.
Career track.
Yeah. So, and I think that's right, and I think Neil's spoken to a lot of really good points. I think the world of work is changing too. The old model was, in order to be recognised as successful, you had to become a leader or a manager, and I think that's shifting. We are starting to recognise the individual contributions that people make, the pathway to senior engineer, and I think Cisco's done an amazing job with some of their certifications, and that recognition of, at CCIE level, they're pretty important people, and that's that individual recognition. But I think too, sometimes recognising that you don't have to be a leader in order to be really successful. My most recent blog was about the power of influence versus decision making, and the fact that you can have enormous influence and really shape what happens within an organisation without even having the actual decision-making authority. And my argument is that's much more powerful and longer lasting and has more impact than the person who signs on the dotted line. So I think we need to think about, our leaders of tomorrow, or our young people coming up. How do we instill upon them that it's not just about those things? There's other factors now that will lead to success beyond just that title of manager, which I think is what Neil was also alluding to as well.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, I totally agree. To give that younger generation more exposure, whether it's putting them on a special project for a period of time, multidisciplinary, maybe it's an assignment. I got an assignment to the US in my 20s and it was transformational. So again, just providing, it doesn't have to be a cookie cutter course as such, but again, whether it's through a sponsor or a mentor, just providing that next generation with a vast array of opportunities and new experiences.
Absolutely. And how can, we all work for large-ish companies. To Neil's point, BT has 20,000 engineers. Netflix doesn't even have 20,000 people. We don't even have 10,000 people. How can, but from the best of our knowledge up here, how can smaller companies get involved in these types of efforts? There's a very wide range of people here.
I'm here representing the smaller company for sure. We're about 1,500 people at Digital globally. And I think what I've found in the 3.5 years that I've been there, it's very much affecting change. Can be extremely powerful if you do it at the grassroots level. So setting up the Women's Leadership Forum was as a result of a question that was asked at one of our all-hands meetings. Why aren't there more women at senior leadership level? And I went downstairs to my friend Kathy down in HR and I said, I think it's time. We just need to set up a Women's Leadership Forum. So I think it's getting, people taking it upon themselves, put your hand up, and then driving change as a result of that. We got executive buy-in, we got one of our female board members as one of our advisors, and it's taken off, and it's been a huge success within the company. So I would encourage those of you who are for smaller companies, and even if it's just a few hundred people, just supporting and recognizing that maybe trying to get a community of people together to help drive and affect change is extremely powerful.
Yeah. And just to build on what Suzie said, and I think other than Neil, the three of us are from smaller organisations, and we talked about this on the call as well. And you've got a head of inclusion. I run in inclusion, but I don't think you need to have that. To Suzie's point, and when you start looking at the whole inclusion and diversity, it does start to feel like you're trying to boil the ocean, which I completely get. So my thought on that would be just start with one thing. Just pick one thing that will resonate with your employee base, your customer base, what your values are as an organisation, what it stands for, and start with that one thing, and that creates the groundswell. You'll find that your employee resource groups or network groups probably spring up from that. That's kind of how you start that movement. It doesn't have to be a whole strategic plan on it.
Yeah, just to build on that, one of the things that made it easier for us at BT, and I joined just after we set up a women's network. We found that a significant majority, I think it was between 30 and 40%, might be more than that, of female members of the household is what pays the broadband bill. So if you've got mostly men deciding how that bill looks, or mostly men deciding how the product looks, then you're missing out potentially 30 to 40% of your market. That's a pretty easy business case. If you're confronted with that sort of challenge, as I know many organisations are. So, who is it that buys from you? Who are your salespeople talking to? I predict a number of them are from all backgrounds, and in order to get the best sales record, understanding that background is critical. So. That's another way of kind of thinking about it.
Okay. With our last couple of minutes, I'm not sure if there are any questions for the panel from the room, but we're happy to take them. Okay. Just one sentence from each of you. What can each person in this room do to get someone new into this industry?
I think for me, I'm a big proponent at the moment of being a sponsor. For those of us who've been in this industry a long time, give somebody, we talked at the beginning about, this isn't one sentence, obviously.
That's fine, we have the time.
About the person who made an impact on your life. So be that person. Be that person for somebody coming up in the organization or somebody that you know through your network.
I think be inspiring. Tell people how we've changed the world in our industry. And if you don't believe that, I think about how many times you use your phone from now to the way home for all the things that you need to do. We absolutely changed the world in a massive way. And actually, we didn't realize it at the time. Now we do, and now we can talk to that. And if you want to change, many people think, I want to change the world, I'm going into politics. No way, man, especially here. We change the world by going out there and connecting people and letting people do the things that they want to do and connect to the like-minded people that of interest that they're into. That's changing the world, and I think when you talk about telecoms like that, I just see it in the room, you get a different set of eyes and a different set of ears about what you're doing and how you do it, and we don't do enough of that in my view. Absolutely.
I would agree with that, and to quote the COLT hashtag, connectivity matters. So evangelising that story and telling that story, which is exactly what Neil's saying about, telling about how we do connect hospitals, we make it easier for the police to catch criminals, we make it, you can watch TV at any time, anywhere. All those things are fundamentally changing who we are and evangelising that story. And, what I said before about we just don't know the impact, the mark that we leave on other people. So make sure it's a positive one and sell the story about the industry.
Absolutely. I know that I still can't explain even to my parents what I do. And so I think one of these days, one of these ridiculously long intercontinental flights, I'm just going to say, the next 10 hours I'm going to figure out how to say in one sentence exactly what I do. All right, with that, I'd like to thank our panelists. Thank you so much for coming over here. I really appreciate it. And we'll let everyone get on with their day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.